I'd been delivering pizzas for years to make ends meet, but one particular evening would forever alter my perception of the job. It was a rainy, stormy night when I received an order for a remote, seemingly isolated cabin deep in the woods. The customer's voice on the phone had been unsettlingly cold, and the address sounded like something out of a horror movie. Still, the promise of a hefty tip convinced me to undertake the eerie journey. The rain hammered on my windshield as I navigated winding, unlit roads that seemed to lead further into the heart of darkness. When I finally arrived at the cabin, its rustic appearance and isolation sent a shiver down my spine. The place looked abandoned, and the only light came from a dimly lit lantern on the porch. Ignoring my growing unease, I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the door. I hesitated for a moment before knocking 3 times, just as the mysterious customer had instructed. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a tall, middle-aged man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. He was dressed in tattered clothes, and his disheveled appearance gave off an unsettling aura. I cleared my throat and handed him the pizza, expecting him to pay and send me on my way, but instead, he just stared at me, his gaze unwavering. Finally, in a soft, monotone voice, he said, "You should come inside. It's not safe out here." I could feel my heart pounding as a sense of dread washed over me. I'd heard enough horror stories to know that following a stranger into an isolated cabin was a recipe for disaster. But something about the man's demeanor, something desperate and pleading, made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit and the air was heavy with an unsettling, musty smell. The man gestured for me to sit at a wooden table, and as I did, I noticed something odd about the room. The walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings, like something out of an occult textbook. The man seemed to read my thoughts and said, "You're probably wondering why I asked you to come in. You see, I've been living in fear, hunted by something I can't explain. I ordered this pizza as a way to lure you here, to protect me." Just as he finished speaking, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the woods outside, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions. Fear surged through me as I realized I was now trapped in this cabin with a stranger and whatever horrors lurked outside. The man's eyes filled with terror as he whispered, "They're here." The cabin's window shook and I could hear something scratching at the walls. Panic set in, and I knew I had to escape. I pushed past the man and fled into the stormy night, leaving behind the pizza and the cabin of horrors. As I drove away, I could still hear the man's desperate screams echoing in my ears, and I prayed that whatever was hunting him would never find me. It was a night I would never forget, a reminder that sometimes the scariest encounters are the ones that feel all too real. My name is Sam, and I've been delivering pizzas for as long as I can remember. The job pays the bills, but it's never been particularly exciting, until one chilling evening when I got an order that would change everything. The address seemed normal enough at first, just another house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But when I pulled up, I noticed something odd. All the windows were boarded up, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds. It looked like nobody had lived there for years. I grabbed the pizza and made my way to the front door, my unease growing with each step. As I knocked, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. An elderly man with wild, unkempt hair and bloodshot eyes stood in the doorway. He mumbled something incoherent and extended a trembling hand to take the pizza. I couldn't help but notice the strange symbols etched on the walls behind him. The air was heavy with an unsettling silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Reluctantly, I handed him the pizza and he handed me a wad of cash that was far more than the cost of the order. I was about to turn and leave when he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. His grip was ice cold and his eyes bore into mine. "You have to stay," he rasped, his voice trembling with fear. "They won't let me leave, but maybe they'll let you go if you stay quiet." My heart raced as I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. He was clearly unhinged, and I needed to get out of there. I managed to break free and stumbled backward, leaving the money and the pizza behind. As I rushed to my car, I heard a chorus of eerie whispers emanating from the house, growing louder and more sinister. I sped away, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that unsettling encounter. I decided to do some research on the house and its history. It turned out that the place had been abandoned for years after a gruesome murder had occurred there. The victim had been the elderly man's daughter, and he had been the prime suspect but was never convicted due to a lack of evidence. The case had remained unsolved, and the man had lived alone in that house ever since, haunted by the memories of that terrible night. The thought of what I had narrowly escaped chilled me to the bone. I realized that the man's desperate plea for me to stay had likely been a desperate attempt to protect me from whatever malevolent force still lingered in that house. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the scariest encounters are the ones that are all too real. From that day on, I couldn't look at a pizza delivery order the same way again, and I was haunted by the knowledge that there are horrors lurking behind even the most ordinary facades. I've been delivering pizzas for the past 5 years, and in that time, I've seen some bizarre stuff. But one night, a delivery would take me down a twisted path I never could have imagined. The delivery address led me to an upscale suburban neighborhood, and I pulled up to a lavish mansion, thinking I'd hit the jackpot with the tip. The place looked like something out of a magazine, complete with a sprawling garden and pristine white columns. But my excitement faded when I rang the doorbell, and a middle-aged woman with a vacant look in her eyes opened the door. Her face was pale, and dark circles framed her distant gaze. She took the pizza without a word and handed me a wad of cash that was far too generous. I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine as I made my way back to my car. Just as I was about to drive away, I noticed a flicker of movement in one of the mansion's windows. I squinted through the darkness and saw a figure, a child staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The kid couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, and something about the whole situation seemed off. I decided to trust my instincts and parked my car a bit down the street, keeping an eye on the mansion. Minutes turned into hours, and I watched as more figures appeared in the windows, children of varying ages, all looking disheveled and frightened. My gut told me that something sinister was happening inside that mansion, and I couldn't just drive away and ignore it. I called the police, explaining what I had seen, and they assured me they'd investigate. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When they finally entered the mansion, they discovered a horrifying secret. The woman who had taken the pizza was running a twisted cult-like operation. She had been luring vulnerable children from the neighborhood, keeping them locked in the basement and subjecting them to unspeakable horrors. The children I had seen in the windows had been imprisoned for weeks, if not longer. The police arrested the woman, and a team of social workers stepped in to care for the traumatized children. The whole neighborhood was in shock, unable to fathom the horrors that had been unfolding right under their noses. I couldn't sleep for weeks, haunted by the thought that I had unknowingly played a role in uncovering the sinister truth behind that mansion's facade. But in the end, my decision to trust my instincts had saved those innocent children from a fate too horrifying to imagine. That night, as I delivered pizzas to countless homes, I couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets lay hidden behind the seemingly ordinary doors of suburbia. It was a chilling reminder that evil could lurk just around the corner, and sometimes the most terrifying things were the ones we least expected.